I'm turning 80 these days. Wow, it's incredible. The Bible says well that our life is like a fog that soon disappears. Wow. My name is Carlos Trevino, and in this audiobook I tell you about my Christian life, a walk with Christ for 47 years, almost half a century. And I have titled it The Great Adventure, because it really has been a wonderful and great adventure with many miracles, one after another. It is told thematically and not chronologically. I am the Lord your God, who teaches you to benefit, who leads you in the way you should go. Forward. The little book, The Great Adventure, My Christian Walk, was written for you with two very specific purposes. The first is to make it very clear that the Christian life is not monotonous, boring, and empty, but rather an extraordinary succession of spectacular events with constant miracles from God that make this life wonderful, leaving us with our mouths open. The world is the one that offers a monotonous, boring, and empty life, offering a lot, but giving nothing but desolation and destruction. The second is to motivate you to do great things for Christ by following this story or doing much, much more. God wants to use you for the expansion of the gospel in this lost world, and He will do so if you are willing and ready to die to yourself and follow Him. It is my greatest desire and request to God that by reading it, you will be set on fire for Christ. Let's change the world for Christ. Ask great things of God. Attempt great things for God. Expect great things from God. Chapter 1. A New Life, 1977. February 28, 1977, the happiest day of my life. Oh, happy day when Jesus washed away my sins.
Oh, happy day.
Oh, happy day.
Oh, happy day.
Oh, happy day.
Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
When Jesus walked.
He washed my sins away.
Oh, happy day.
Yeah.
The abundant life that Jesus promises to everyone who surrenders to Him is a certain reality in my life, and I hope it is also true in yours. The temperament that God gave me has its great advantages, but great sinner that I am, my life has been stained with many deficiencies. From an early age, I had an obsession with overachievement, and that caused me a lot of problems when trying to relate to my peers. A superiority complex brought me arrogance, pride, and contempt for others. I dedicated myself to being number one in everything I undertook. By the time I was 15, I was looking for something different from what all young people do, and when I entered university, I thought it would be better to study abroad, and I went to the United States without money and without knowledge of the language. It was a very hard and difficult time for me and entailed a lot of loneliness and frustration. The concept of God was ruled out because He didn't have time for that. I managed to get admitted to a university in California, and I was able to graduate with honors in aeronautical engineering with master's degrees offered at the most prestigious universities. I enrolled in a master's degree in business administration while starting to work in a company as a sales representative for Trane air conditioners for Latin America. I traveled throughout Latin America promoting these products. The company sent me to Mexico as their representative, and I worked hard to start my sales company, working excessively, with great problems of loneliness and emptiness. It was when God grabbed me and gave me a complete change through my sister Christina that led me to know Christ and start reading the Bible. I went from extreme arrogance and always being angry to spectacular inner peace and inner contentment. This came immediately when I started reading the Bible and attending Bible studies. Soon they invited me to give my testimony in several cities in Mexico. The joy and contentment in my life had come with a very determined vision of what I would do for the rest of my life. No more business for the world, but for God. I talked about Christ everywhere, inviting all my contacts to a Bible study, and it gave me great satisfaction to be an emissary of God. My family couldn't believe it. From being the ogre of the house to the loving preacher was a very noticeable change, and soon my parents and my sisters were in Christ too. Abundant life was already flowing in my veins. The joy and peace of God flooded my life. A great miracle of God. Chapter 2, beginning to witness 1979. For most people who receive Christ, it takes them a long time to understand what happened and to begin to make changes and to be more disciplined in reading the Bible daily and in general giving their correct value to this new life. This was certainly not the case for me, as I had immediate changes in my life and I began to read the Bible with great enthusiasm. But the most notable thing was that I began to talk about Christ everywhere, even without knowing anything about the books of the Bible. My secretary Alejandra received Christ weeks after my experience. 3 months later, I had to go to Monterrey to a cousin's wedding, and I asked my uncle to speak at the reception. I spoke about Christ before a group of more than 100 people. And afterwards, I was at dinner with an ex-nun who was very bitter and angry with God, and I was witnessing very strongly to her and to others. This was what characterized my first steps in Christ, talking about Him everywhere. I went to the studies on Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays and invited many people from the contacts I had. Soon studies began in my own apartment on Wednesdays. It was one of those Wednesdays in 1979 that the preacher told me at the last minute, "I have to go to the airport. You tell them something." I had never given a Bible study, but I talked about a book I was reading, Adventures in Prayer. And I don't remember what I said, but it went well, and I was delighted. At this time, Daniel Anderrud arrived with his girlfriend Claudia to announce that they would soon get married and go to Madrid as missionaries, which impressed me a lot. In 1981, Daniel had to go preach at a very large church in San Diego, and he asked me to preach, and I did so knowing that I was not prepared for that. I talked about the book of Acts and the great expansion of the gospel that is described there, emphasizing talking about Christ, which was really my strong point. It was at that time that I began to go to the German club, making it my mission field. And there I met Miguel Osuna, brother of the famous tennis player, Rafael Osuna, and with his wife we began Bible studies, a miracle from God. Chapter 3, forming groups 1-982, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, Matthew 12:34d. The adventure that began when I received Christ in February 1977 had in no way lost strength over the years, but was burning more intensely in my heart. And I was talking about Christ everywhere. I was already going to my mission field, the German club. I was already meeting with Miguel Osuna and other people at his house. But I had to move it to my apartment so that we would have continuity, and so every Sunday without fail there would be Bible studies, and I invited a lot of people. The Sunday group was just starting. It was in the summer of 1982 that in San Diego I met Pepita Guzman, who with great enthusiasm received Christ, and returning to Mexico, she invited me to her house in Tecamachalco to have a study with her husband and her children, who also received Christ. With Pepita Guzman and her family, we started having studies at her house on Tuesday nights and inviting people. She soon filled her house with people, including the purchasing director of General Motors, whom I had invited after talking business in his office since he was a client of ours, and Los Panchitos, a gang of criminals that operated in Mexico City and wreaked havoc in the city. One of the leaders of that band came to Christ when one night we went to preach to the band in an unspecified place in Tacubaya, and that night he made a decision for Christ and somehow began to go to the Tecamachalco studies. It was quite an adventure. We were very afraid that he was just going to study the house and then assault it, but that was not the case. He really wanted to hear about Christ. And so there were already two groups formed, one on Tuesdays in Tecamachalco and one on Sundays in my apartment in the South. And the groups grew, and their needs also grew a lot. I worked long hours every day, and I was killing myself with all these multiple activities. Furthermore, in 1983, God put it on my heart to move to the Pedregal suburb to preach there. I did not have the money to buy a house in the Pedregal, but God did. And through a true miracle, the owner of a complex financed the purchase of a condominium house for me. There I was going to preach for the next 30 years to the people of the Pedregal and have a group there among those people. Wow, the way God takes us from one adventure to another, always exciting and full of adrenaline. Now I was in Pedregal because of a miracle of God. Chapter 4. Group in Pedregal, 1984. God had determined that I would preach in the Pedregal. And by the summer of 1983, I was already installed in my new house. That year, I invited each of those who lived in that complex to dinner to talk to them about Christ, but I did not receive any favorable response. They thought I was crazy. A neighbor even said that I was homosexual, since I didn't have a wife. It was very frustrating for me, but I was already very busy with two groups in Tecamachalco and in the South, and also working full-time in the company where I was the director. It was not until the following year, 1985, that in the summer, a young couple moved in front of my house. I immediately went to welcome them and talk to them about Christ. So this lady Mima and her husband Walter accepted Christ with me, and then we started studies on Thursday afternoons at her house with them and her sister. I didn't know that Mima had 8 siblings, and soon they began to come to the Bible studies. One of the brothers is named Enrique. He was a 21-year-old young man who enthusiastically accepted Christ and began to bring all his friends. Enrique couldn't come to the studies regularly because he had classes on Thursday nights, although his girlfriend Luz did attend every Thursday. And to solve the problem, we started the youth study on Fridays because I didn't want Enrique to miss out. And so the study of many young people was soon a success on Friday nights, although I continued with the study on Thursdays as well. Daniel and Claudia came from Madrid to help me and preach there. Here's a fragment of a talk by Daniel in Pedregal, 1987.
Me gusta mucho tomar Juan 3:16 y poner el nombre del individuo. Por ejemplo, porque de tal manera amó Dios al mundo, las multitudes, casi ahora 6.000 millones de habitantes. Sí, pero también vale decir, porque de tal manera amó Dios a Daniel, ¿sí? Que ha dado a su Hijo unigénito, para que todo aquel que en él cree, para que si Daniel cree en él, no se pierda, mas tenga vida eterna. O sea, Dios ama a los individuos. ¿Qué va? Ovejas tontas, así las ve Jesucristo. ¿Y por qué? Porque ve la verdadera condición. Ve que están profundamente metidos en el pecado, desorientados, confundidos. Y como consecuencia, separados de Él, a menos que le conozcan, ¿verdad? Separados de Él eternamente. Es tan fácil acostumbrarse a la gente que nos rodea, pero si tenemos ojos como los ojos de Jesús, entonces los vamos a ver y no nos dejaremos engañar por las apariencias.
I could no longer spend more than 24 hours a day, and I honestly don't know how I did so much with the hours available, but I felt great enthusiasm and joy that God was working. I saw the group of young people having immense potential for the future, since they would be the preachers of the next generation. I have to admit that I invested a lot of attention, time, and effort into the young people. We formed a soccer team where I was the goalie. And we entered a league, tennis games, including bringing great tennis players from the United States to play against the best from the German club and witness to them, with various conferences, ski trips, and many other activities, as well as Bible studies with me, the miracle of God in me. Chapter 5, The Persian Rugs, 1983. I went to Madrid, Spain, 6 consecutive years on my holidays from work 1982 to 1986 to help establish a group there. On my trip to Madrid, Spain in 1983, I entered a Persian rug store having seen a rug that I really liked, but knowing that I would not be able to buy it and bring it to Mexico due to the import restrictions of the time. Talking to the owner, I was surprised when he told me that he would come to Mexico weeks later and bring the rug to my house, and with that promise I bought it. Obviously, I told him about Christ and his great need for God. 4 weeks later, he was at my house in Mexico giving me the Persian rug that I had liked. He had come with a large number of rugs that were going to be bought by wealthy people. They were worth more than $1 million. We established a good relationship, and he soon told me that he had not been able to complete the sale of his rugs, and he was under pressure since he needed to return to Spain. He asked me to store the rugs at my house for a while. He told me to use them in my house, and I agreed. On my subsequent trips to Spain, I spoke much more about Christ to him and to all of his family. And the rugs were in my house for 4 years when he finally came to take them, offering me to keep some at very attractive prices. It's incredible what happened with this great adventure of the Persian rugs. That entrusted me with such a large amount of valuables for so long when the world is very distrustful. With Christ we project confidence. Today I have some of those rugs in my house by a miracle of God. Chapter 6, Sale of the Company, 1986. I did my university degree in California and then my master's degree in Wisconsin. Trane, a manufacturer of air conditioning equipment, offered me to represent them in Mexico. And so I came to Mexico in 1971, forming my own company. I had overwork fever. I was worse than ever, and if I had continued like this, I would now be the most successful man in the cemetery. That was what brought me to Christ in 1977, coupled with the terrible devaluation in 1976. After a few years of being a Christian, my heart was no longer in the company, and I wanted to leave to preach full time. I asked God to make me miraculously sell my company, because no one wanted to invest in Mexico at that time. I went to Japan and I went to Germany, but I didn't find anyone interested. Carrier was my staunch enemy, and the miracle was that they talked to me about joining forces in the air conditioning business for highway buses, where I had 100% of the market. In 1986, Carrier bought 49% of the company because it could not buy more due to Mexican laws. They never knew that Trane had already notified me that they were no longer going to manufacture the compressor that I needed for my equipment. Carrier arrived at the most crucial time for the company, as I could now use the Carrier compressor. A miracle of God. When Carrier came in, I was freed from so much work in the company and could dedicate myself to serving God. But he had to perform another miracle, because Carrier insisted that I remain in the company because they said that what they were buying was me. God allowed it to be only a 3-year contract to find a replacement for me. I got it in 6 months, and I was able to move out because God already had other things for me that would take up all my time. With Carrier as a partner, the company grew a lot, but I no longer had anything to do with it. They had bought their participation very cheaply because Mexico was very bad economically, and it was a miracle that they wanted to invest in the country. So I was out of the company. God had clearly told me that I could not have 2 wives. My marriage to the company would have to end for God to give me a wife. And so in 1994, with a very serious devaluation that scared away investment, Carrier bought the rest of the company. The laws in Mexico having changed due to the free trade agreement, it was in that year that I married my wife, Karina. A true double miracle of God, sale and wedding. Chapter 7. Adventures in Costa Rica, 1987. God's clock is very accurate. It is never a second late, and it is never a second ahead. His providence is carefully calculated for his plans. The day I had my first interview with Carrier for a possible sale or partnership, that same day God showed me an additional area where He wanted me to start serving Him. It was a morning in March 1984 when I had breakfast with Carrier executives, and I went early to, as always, have some time to read the Bible alone. The restaurant was empty with the exception of a lady sitting at one of the tables. I went to her, Daphne Quezada, and gave her a pamphlet of ours telling her to read it while the person she was waiting for arrived. And I returned to my table to wait for the people who would soon come. I forgot about her, but at the end of breakfast she came to me and said she was very interested, asking me for the address of where we were meeting for Bible study. I gave it to her, and that Sunday she attended the studio with a good attitude and would do so for the next 2 years. She was the deputy counselor of the Costa Rican embassy in Mexico. It was the beginning of a service for God in Costa Rica. At the beginning of 1986, this lady asked me to lend her the Mercedes-Benz car that I had bought. The presidential candidate of Costa Rica, Oscar Rios, came to Mexico to ask for support for his campaign, and I gladly lent it to him. He was elected president of Costa Rica later that year, and I wrote to him asking for an appointment to see him in Costa Rica, to give him a Bible that he would need for his personal life, his family, and to govern his country well. President Rios gave me an appointment on Friday, January 27, 1987, and I arrived punctually to give him a Bible. The appointment with the president was short. He kindly thanked me for my gift, although I tried to tell him more about his need for Christ. I knew a Costa Rican girl, Martha Mora, who had visited Mexico and attended one of our studies with her sister who was living in Mexico. I had written her beforehand telling her about my pending visit to San Jose, Costa Rica, and asking her to meet for dinner that weekend. That night I met up with this girl, Martha Mora, and her boyfriend. Obviously we talked about Christ. And I saw Martha again the next day when she offered to take me to the airport on Monday for my return to Mexico. She took me to the airport and begged me to please return to Costa Rica with the promise that she would gather a group for me to speak to about Christ. I returned to Costa Rica on February 7th, and she had brought together all of her family and her friends for a Bible talk. That night we had great success, as many made a decision for Christ and asked me to please return for more studies. This was the beginning, the adventure of the following years. I went to Costa Rica every 5 or 6 weeks for 7 years. I arrived on Friday and left early the following Thursday to get to the Thursday study in the Pedregal. Between visits, I sent a weekly cassette that Martha picked up at Customs, and they listened to it as a group on Saturday afternoons. I was busier than ever because the job is not to preach once a week, but rather to attend individually to the people in the group with their different problems, and I was doing it here in all the groups and in Costa. Rica, God had taken me out of the company for a much more important job according to His providence. A great miracle of God. During one of those trips, while at the airport to travel to Costa Rica, I met Jay Kyle, an American who was coming to Mexico as a missionary and would be studying Spanish in Costa Rica for a year. He was in Mexico for 20 years. He was a great friend and brother until the day of his death in 2022. A great miracle of God was of great benefit to me in future years, having a godly friend. During my stays in Costa Rica, I had free time in the mornings and I began to memorize more seriously. I had done it before, but not so consistently. I read of a 19th century English preacher who set out to memorize the New Testament in his English language and in Greek. That motivated me to want to do the same, and I made a plan to memorize the entire New Testament Spanish in 10 years, and I started to carry it out. But I forgot to include spaces to review what was memorized, because it is not worth memorizing what is new while forgetting what is already memorized, and that is where I failed. I only managed to memorize a little more than half of the New Testament. The life of the Christian includes a life of memorization and is lifelong. I didn't meet my goal, but I have been memorizing consistently. It was not until 1992 that we sent a missionary to attend to the group in Costa Rica on a permanent basis, because I could not continue being a remote pastor. Nathan Anderud and his family went to live in San Jose, Costa Rica, and take the group there. In 2002, we even had the great privilege of taking our children to Costa Rica, and later in 2004, participate in Nathan's farewell for 12 years of work in Costa Rica. We were 8 people from Mexico for that event, a miracle from God to give me all that experience in Costa Rica. Chapter 8, Training Youth 1988. A father puts all his effort into preparing his children for the next generation, and he knows that is of utmost importance. A pastor puts all his effort to prepare the young people of the group, knowing that they are the preachers of the next generation. I knew that very well, and I wanted to put a lot of emphasis on young people. In 1988, I already had 12 to 15 young people who were attending the study on Fridays. It was time to begin deeper studies with them, discipleship. And we began those studies Monday at 8 a.m. and Wednesday 8 p.m. These studies would last for 14 years so that they would then be the preachers of their own groups. And so it happened. In 1989, we had our first retreat, 5 days in a hotel in Avendaro with the attendance of 90 people, many of whom were young people.
También, a ver quiénes tenemos por aquí. Me gustaría saber quiénes son los jóvenes que ayudan a Carlos en compartiendo estudios. O... ¿Quiénes son? ¿Alejandro?
Compartiendo, pero...
Sí.
Es más, Tony.
¿Tony? Ahí está Tony. ¿Tú, Tony, hace mucho que conociste al Señor?
Pues no hace no mucho, 2 años.
2 años. Sí. ¿Y estudias o trabajas? O...
Estoy actualmente trabajando en la carrera que estudié, que fue diseño gráfico.
Ajá.
Y gracias a Dios, pues, me ha prosperado abundantemente con trabajo. Pues está saqueando el negocio, pero bueno, es otra cosa.
Tú diseñaste, creo, la portada del cassette de Natán, ¿no?
Sí, exacto.
La segunda portada.
Ajá, exacto, la segunda.
Muy bien.
Estoy
Qué bueno.
trabajando con mi hermano, de hecho, que también es cristiano ahora.
Ajá.
A los 4 meses yo soy cristiano y también fue cristiano y empezamos a
Ajá.
negocio juntos.
Pues gracias a Dios, qué bueno. ¿Y los discípulos, los que se discipulan con Carlos, quiénes son?
Eduardo.
¿Todos? No, pero creo que hay un grupo más cercano, ¿no?
Eduardo, Marisa, Nico, Tony, Luz, Laura.
Ajá.
Bueno, el Alejandro.
Son dos grupos.
Son 2 grupos, son los individuos.
Tú conociste a Andy, ¿verdad? Una joven de Tijuana, ¿no? Estuviste platicando mucho con ella, ¿no? Sí, era lo que le comentaba yo a... Sí. Bueno, y ustedes recién se casaron hace poquito.
En diciembre.
En diciembre. Ajá. ¿Y cuánto hace que conocieron al Señor?
Hace 3 años.
3 años. ¿Los dos al mismo tiempo?
No, yo primero recibí a Cristo. Carlos me invitó al seminario y yo recibí a Cristo. Ya era ya mi novia. Teníamos miles de problemas.
Ajá.
Y pues yo llegué y le dije, ¿no? Que yo había recibido a Cristo. Tampoco había entendido mucho, pero yo andaba muy desesperado, necesitaba algo. Y me agarré de Dios. Ella la semana fuimos a una comida con Carlos y recibió a Cristo. Y pues nuestro noviazgo cambió 360 grados.
Radicalmente.
Sí, pues ahora nos casamos, ¿no? Si no hubiera sido por Cristo, no nos íbamos a casar.
Bueno, y Dios nos dio la convicción para hacer una boda cristiana,
Uh-huh.
en la que no hubo alcohol, no hubo baile, y se predicó la palabra.
Gracias a Dios, se había oído eso. Es bonito. Muy bien. Pues qué bueno, no sé quién más haya por aquí.
And we repeated it in 1990 and 1991, but now with the attendance of young people from Costa Rica. The preacher was Hector Valle from Tijuana with music by his daughter Anita. In addition, we had frequent picnics where one of them would preach. An annual memorization contest where a minimum of 50 verses was required, and missionary trips to Costa Rica and Germany to learn what missionaries do and face in order to form groups there. And the Christmas plays that the young people themselves organized. All of these activities were preparing the youth for their growth to be the preachers of the future. Enrique was the most enthusiastic young man and having leadership skills. He pulled the others to serve Christ on the weekends by going to witness in the shopping centers or getting together to memorize or inviting new people. In 2000s, Enrique began meeting with a couple on Saturdays in Cuernavaca for what would soon become the Cuernavaca Group that grew exponentially in the following years, discipling many young people. There also formed a large group of Italians who had the opportunity to visit their relatives in Italy to talk to them about Christ. An important topic of study is marriage, of supreme interest to young singles. We had the privilege of marrying several of these young people. What a great adventure it has been to build the lives of these young people. A miracle of God in using me for this work. The best way to teach is not only to know the subject well, but also to live it firsthand so that the disciples see it in real life. For this, I needed to be married, and for them to see the principles in my own life and that of my marriage. But where can I find the right help for me? Genesis 2, verse 20. But for Adam there was found no help meet for him. Chapter 9. Finding a suitable help meet, 1979-1994. My life before Christ was a highly selfish and arrogant, empty life. I thought that the woman worthy of me had not been born, and no one I had met reached the level that I thought I had. For the same reason, there was no possibility in my mind of marriage with anyone. Everything changed when I accepted Christ in my heart, because my tremendous sin of pride became very obvious to me, and I could see for the first time the attractiveness of having a companion for my life, especially if she was a woman of God. Very early in my Christian life, 1979, I was told that all non-Christian women were ruled out as prospects for me. And so most of the women in the world were being eliminated, 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, because what fellowship has justice with injustice, and what communion has light with darkness? In the Christian group, I saw beautiful girls, not according to the world's standard, but they had something that attracted me a lot, and it was their happiness and joy in the Lord that was easily seen in their faces and made them beautiful. And I began to search obsessively to find a Christian wife soon. However, I was advised that I had to wait, as there were many areas of my life that had to be corrected and changed before I could offer anything to anyone. I admitted that my life was a mess and that many changes had to happen and were happening. Furthermore, I wanted a mature servant of God, and they were not going to pay attention to a spiritual baby like me. I obeyed and concentrated on my Bible studies, discarding any possibility of searching. By that time, I was a very, very busy person, with a company to run and many Bible studies to give week after week. So there was no time to continue searching, and I learned that the woman of God comes from Jehovah, Proverbs 19:14. House and wealth are inherited from fathers, but from Jehovah the prudent wife. And I dedicated myself fully to my work and service to God. If God wanted me to have a companion, let him bring her, or I would remain single like the Apostle Paul and have more time for God. I already thought that I was never going to get married, although I had constant pressure from my family and many people, including my Christian friends, that it was important to have a partner. They said that I was hoping that the woman of God was going to come knock on my door and ask me to marry her. Well, it wasn't like that, but very close to the real thing. And so, thinking that I would never get married, and already being 48 years old.
An American missionary who was visiting us with a couple of friends arrived at the Bible study on a Thursday in October 1992.
She was Karina, and it took me 3 months to invite her to have coffee because I couldn't, as a preacher, chase the girls who came to the group. God had brought her, and I trusted him. After several dates, I was convinced that she was the one who would be the partner of my life. She came from MacArthur's church in California, which coincides in doctrine with what I preach.
The relationship was short, and the wedding day arrived, January 21st, 1994.
I had invited many people, since I have always thought that that day and the day of your death are the best days to talk about Christ, because the guests will listen to you. Karina told me that we were having an evangelistic meeting and not a wedding. God brought us together to preach in Mexico for the rest of our lives. And we have done so until today, 2024, 5 children later. The Bible is not wrong. The woman of God comes from Jehovah. There is no need to go out of it to look for her. He brings her at the right time and in the way he decides. A confirmed bachelor finally got married. A miracle of God. Chapter 10, Offspring for God, 1998-2001. There can be no greater gift from God other than salvation and being blessed with children. Psalms 127:3, behold, children are an inheritance from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a thing of esteem. Specifically in the Christian, God expects descendants for him. Malachi 2:14, because he was looking for descendants for God. We knew that the primary function of marriage is marital companionship, but also an important function is to bring offspring for God. Children who are educated in Christian principles and a supreme love for Jesus. Karina's goal was to have 6 children, but we were aware of how old we were. I was 50 years old, and Karina was 36 years old. Our first child did not arrive until more than 4 years into our marriage. God was merciful to us because there was difficulty during the birth, but our son Carlos arrived in May 1998. We immediately decided to look for a second child, but again, there were difficulties. We began to ask God for the possibility of adoption. God opened the door for us in Russia, which was providing adoption facilities for Americans given the economic problems that Russia had at that time. We carry all the relevant papers to adopt a Russian girl and take her to the United States and Mexico. And so in February 2000s, Karina and I traveled to Moscow to adopt not only a girl, but also a boy. We were in Russia for a week in the process of adopting 2 little ones, the month-old girl and the month-old boy, Anna Karina and Christian David. We had to go to Kira for them. It was a beautiful experience that God gave us. Plus, what was the surprise that God had prepared for us in that Karina would return pregnant, so we would have 3 babies in that year 2000s. Complete chaos, but indescribable joy. By the end of 2000s, we would have 4 babies when Caleb Douglas arrived in October. We hadn't reached the goal of having 6 children, but we were close. We had an additional adoption in 2007. A 7-year-old Mexican girl became part of the Trevino family in December 2007, Valentina Catherine. She distinguished herself in swimming and was champion of the German club in many national events, a great athlete. Karina had obtained her Mexican citizenship in 2006. She had gotten darker skin and darker eyes because she loved Mexico lindo y querido. God's protection was very important in the Trevino family. With 4 babies, the risk of accidents is very high. Our son Carlos broke his leg when he was 1.5 years old, and we didn't realize it for more than a week, but it was not serious. Then when he was 2 years old, he suffered severe conjunctivitis that made him completely blind for 10 days, but it was not serious. Christian and Caleb also suffered broken legs, but it was not serious. The hard part came when Caleb was 10 years old, 2010. While skiing, he had a collision with another elderly person. By a miracle of God, nothing happened to Caleb, but everything happened to the other person, and he was in hospitals for more than a year. We got a legal demand from him for $500,000, and we had to fight it in court in Colorado. It was determined to be an accident, and we won and didn't have to pay anything. A miracle of God. Childhood education now took on a priority. Bible studies for children, Christmas pastorals, and the first steps in their education. The decision was made to educate the children at home, homeschool, motivated by Karina's former pastors, the Brewers, who had done the same with their children. We went to annual homeschool conventions each year in Houston to learn more and purchase materials. And for the next few years, we were very busy raising our children at home. Televisa did an interview with us about home education, and it appeared on national television. Our children would have 2 languages from their parents, but we also decided that they would study a 3rd language, German. Afterwards, the men went to Phoenix to do 2 years of high school and then enter a university in the United States. And so Carlos was admitted to MIT, Christian to the University of Colorado, and Caleb to the University of Arizona, obtaining all of their graduation degrees. What a way to end their wonderful school year. But there is more. Carlos found helpmeet from him that he also attended MIT. He married Linnea Rylander in Mexico, May 2021. A miracle from God. Today, with all the children away from home, we have finished our student work with them. We wanted 6 children, and we only had 5, but counting Carlos' wife, our daughter-in-law, we already reached 6. Wonderful God giving us beyond what we ask or understand. A miracle of God. Chapter 11, Adventures in Germany, 1990-2017. The group where I was born was a group with a strong emphasis on missions. Months after I started in the group, Daniel and Claudia arrived announcing their upcoming wedding and their departure to Madrid, Spain as missionaries to form a small group. 2 years later, I went to visit them. An unforgettable experience that would seal my soul towards the missions. I went to Madrid for 6 consecutive years during my vacations from work to help the missionaries in their work of establishing a group 1982 to 1987. Daniel had been studying the German language intensely, and in 1987 they left for Hamburg. They began to attend the university to meet students, and there they met Lars Meyer, with whom they started a small group. I went to Hamburg in the spring of 1990 with 8 young people from the group from Mexico.
Eduardo, falta una silla. Es verdad, hombre. Yo creo que aquí, no sé. ¿Cuántas ollas? Desde que empezaste a salir
Pues dos acá riquísimas.
Ahora, puede que haga falta sal, pero puede ser ahí.
Al momento
Estás gordo, pero no tanto.
A ver, ¿quién entra aquí?
Liliana.
Liliana, que es muy pequeña, mejor aquí. Bueno, ¿quién la ropa? Sí, ¿perdón?
Liliana. ¿Quién quiere cola? ¿Quién quiere cola?
No,
Cola. ¿Quién quiere? Oh, ahí tiene coca, ¿verdad?
Este mes tiene coca. En España no se coca.
¿Cómo se dice?
Coca-Cola.
¿Agua?
¿Eso es para ti?
¿Pedro, quieres agua?
Sí, gracias.
The Berlin Wall had fallen just a few months earlier, and the small group from Hamburg began making trips to East Germany to present the gospel where it had never been done before, and some people became interested. Already married, Karina and I went to Leipzig. We had the experience of talking about Christ with Russians who were still in the city. It was wonderful to be with them and refute their atheist positions. Karina and I went to Germany several times, just as Daniel and Claudia came to Mexico several times to preach to the group here. Our children, who were now 5, began studying German in Mexico, and the teacher insisted that we take them to Germany to improve their German. And so in 2008, we took them to Hamburg for 2 weeks when they were only 9 years old and younger. During the visit, there was a lot of rain and we couldn't go out anywhere. Lars, who was now one of the preachers, recommended that we go with him to the north, where he had a camper on the beach. Ekenforde, and we stayed there for 2 weeks. It was a camper place, and there they gave daily Bible studies for children, which was perfect for us, and we liked it a lot. We wanted to return the following year, but not to Lars's camper, since we couldn't all fit there. Daniel Sands, one of the groups, recommended that we buy a camper, and we purchased it on eBay, winning the auction with the help of Daniel and others. They promised to take care of the camper and we would only use it. And so for the next 9 years, 2008, 2017, we went to spend 5 weeks each summer in this place of campers, Hemmelmark, participating in the daily Bible studies there. Mainly our children giving studies to other German children and me, preaching the Sundays in Hamburg. It was a wonderful experience spending summers with our children in Germany. We could never have thought of such a wonderful experience as a family doing Bible studies in Germany with our children. The camper was eventually donated in 2019 to accommodate young volunteer preachers coming for a week to help with children's Bible studies. Hear the German boys singing.
Verzweifeln, nicht länger mutlos sein. Gott hat uns seinen Sohn gegeben, mit ihm kehrt neues Leben bei uns ein.
One of the volunteers, Dorina, 18, came to live with us in Mexico for a year to study Spanish, and we practiced German. Only God gave us a great family adventure in Germany. We could never have had as many adventures as God allowed us to have on our mission trips. Certainly much better than the most luxurious tourist trip. Wow, miracle of God in our lives.
Unsere eigenen Versammlung nicht verlassen, wie es einige zu tun pflegen, sondern einander ermahnen und das umso mehr.
Vielleicht fragt ihr mal euer Hinterteil, was die da gerade machen. Wir haben nämlich schon 2 Meter Land gewonnen.
Wie denn?
Wie hat ihr das gemacht?
Was?
Wie habt ihr das gemacht?
Ja, dann brauchen wir... Ja, deswegen, das sagen wir jetzt nicht, aber könnt ihr ein bisschen weiter hier in die Richtung kommen? Der Mittelteil muss ein bisschen mehr in die Richtung.
Jetzt müsst ihr hier zu uns kommen.
Könnt ihr bitte das auch machen? Weil ich
wie eine Raupe.
bin hier gerade ein bisschen...
Die zieht sich zusammen und dann wieder auseinander.
Alle auf dem Schiff müssen immer auf den Kapitän gehorchen. Von Schiffsjungen bis zu Matrosen, alle. Immer wenn es heißt, der Kapitän sagt, dann ist es ein Befehl von mir. Wir müssen alle das machen. Wir können das üben. Der Kapitän sagt, setz dich hin.
Chapter 12. Praising God 2003, 2013, Psalms 146, 1 and 2. Praise, O my soul, the Lord. I will praise the Lord in my life. I will sing psalms to my God as long as I live. My knowledge of Christian music was zero before coming to Christ. But that changed quickly in the first years of my Christian life, learning not only the great hymns, but also their history. We didn't sing at meetings so as not to disturb the neighbors. The miracle of God came when we hired a driver in 2003 to help us with the children and with different activities around the house. This driver, Sergio Hernandez, asked for a couple of afternoons a week to continue with his singing classes. He was always singing in the car with the children. In 2004, while we were preparing our first large camp with all groups, which exceeded more than 250 people plus children. With the motto, "You are the light of the world," Sergio recommended that we use a new song, "Turn on a Light," and the she sang for me to hear.
Enciende una luz, déjala brillar, la luz de Jesús, que brille en todo lugar. no la puedes esconder, no te puedes callar ante tal necesidad. Enciende una luz en la oscuridad.
That day, Sergio stopped being a driver and became an assistant to sing at the different events and camps that we would have in the future. A miracle from God to provide music in our groups. Sergio accompanied us to Costa Rica to say goodbye to Nathan and Derud and sang Enciende una luz. We began to translate famous Christian hymns that were not in Spanish. We began recording full albums of that music. El Faro de Tu Amor, O Guía, Rey Eterno, and La Cruz de Cristo, each with 15 songs. And when Atsuko from Germany came to Mexico in 2006 to sing for us at Club Alaman before 250 people, Sergio coordinated the musical event. Sergio was very important in complementing my preaching with music during that decade, 2004-2013. But additionally, Sergio, who knew a lot about computers and technology, helped me record and save all the talks and create a web page, You Are the Light of the World. How a hired driver became the group's singer is a miracle from God. Chapter 13, Fostering Fellowship, 1988-2013. When we come to Christ, we are made new creatures, but we come to this new life with many suitcases from the past. Our selfishness is on the surface, and it will take us a long time to deal with this terrible disease, if not a lifetime. There is a pressing need to ask for help, and that is why it is very important to truly belong to the group and see it as our family. Constant exchange with other believers is vital. We started having camps in Costa Rica in 1988 and 1989, and then in Mexico starting in 1990 and every year. In those camps, we preached on a topic for 4 days in some secluded place. There were games, campfires, and songs for the whole family. This promoted Christian fellowship. These camps continued until 2003 with great success, uniting believers into a family where they received help and gave help to each other. The next camp in 2004 would be much bigger and would have much more music. Sergio Hernandez joined as the person in charge of the music, and we were ready for a sumptuous event where there would be more than 250 people plus children, and we booked it at Mansion Galindo in San Juan del Rio Cortaro with the motto, You Are the Light of the World. The costume night with the theme Mexican clothing was very popular, and we had another camp of that magnitude every 2 years with their respective costume night. Here is a fragment of Costume Night 2010 theme biblical events.
Hasta dentro de 40 días. ¡Levanten a los chamacos! ¡Súbanla el agua! ¡Ese Noé! ¡Qué bárbaro! ¡Ve nomás el agua! ¡Qué buena idea, eh! No, el agua ya pasó. A ver, qué ondejita. Sí, todos están cosiendo, estoy sudando más no poder. ¡Se van a ahogar! Ese Noé no tomó clases de manejo.
Christmas talks have been held every year since 1983 and were a way of inviting new people. as Christmas is always a proper time where people are inclined to listen. All of these activities strongly promoted Christian fellowship. It has always been a struggle to get group members to give each other in holy love. A true miracle to have good results, and we did. Hebrews 10:24 and 25, and let us consider one another to encourage one another to love and good works, not failing to gather together, as is the custom of some, but exhorting one another, and all the more as you see that day approaching. Chapter 14, starting over 2014. A leader seeks to teach in such a way that he is left without a job. And that is what happened in the group that had already grown a lot. I had to leave to give the disciples the opportunity to take the reins of the group. In 2012, I went to the camp as a guest since I was no longer going to participate in the group and I was going to retire. And I would start a new group on my own. I had my mission field in the German club and I would go find new people, and so I did. I brought the Christmas shepherds to the German club before the swimming team in 2013, 2014 and 2015. I was starting from scratch and it wouldn't be easy, but there were many young people on the swimming team. And I traveled with them to different competitions in Mexico with my daughter Valentina and my son Carlos. I even left Pedregal and moved further south near the German club, where I went daily to swim and fish for souls. And I invited them to the Thursday studies at my house. This is how a small group of 15-20 people grew, with some young people with whom I had camps in Cuernavaca, Acapulco, and Veracruz. My wife, Karina, continued with studies for women and personal discipleship. In 2014, Jesse Islas came and began studying with me so that in 2021 he would begin to give talks and studies in this small group. Armando Pedrosa also now preaches in the group. We continued with the Christmas plays every year and Christmas talks to invite new people until the pandemic arrived and we had to do the meetings through the computer. When the pandemic ended, it was very difficult to get the group back together for the Thursday Bible study. A comfort had formed in connecting over Zoom. However, we already had a new group of young people who have been faithful. The ladies' study continues steadily each week. Jaime Santos, whom I met at the German club, accepted Christ in 2003 and now married with 2 girls. He went last year to Ajusco as a missionary, and we support him and help him in his vision of having a group there. God has been faithful with his constant miracles to us. Chapter 15, Organizing the Legacy 2021-2024. After almost 50 years of serving the Lord, much material has been accumulated over the years, mainly with the help of the digital age. We have maintained computers and programs to store everything for the next generation of preachers and teachers. It was many years ago that we designed a website where we have saved the weekly talks. With the arrival of Jesse Islas, we restructured the website, adding many other things. The page now has all the weekly talks since 2004. In audio, video, and some in text. We are changing the talks prior to the year 2000 that have been on cassette and are now digital on the page. Series of Ecclesiastes, Philippians, and others. Here's a fragment of Ecclesiastes 1.
El mundo de nuestros días y el mundo de todo el tiempo ha tratado siempre de vivir sin Dios. Al hombre no le interesa tener una relación con Dios. Al hombre sí le interesa tener un Dios, porque Dios puso en su corazón que el hombre busque a Dios. El problema es que Dios quiere ser buscado a la manera de Dios, no a la manera del hombre. Y el hombre de alguna manera sí quiere a Dios, pero como dice Frank Sinatra, a su manera.
There are tools of homeschooling, glimpses of special events, Bible, and testimonies. The audiovisuals include films, mostly Christian, and we already have more than 100. Music, where we have more than 50 hymns recorded by us. Audiobooks that we translated from English, ebooks where we add all the books of the Bible that we have preached over the years, verse by verse. And anyway, there is a lot of material available on that website. We have a YouTube channel as well as a Spotify and Apple Podcast channel. We have entered into a partnership with Lamplighter to produce their audio dramas and books in Spanish, many of which you can already listen to on the website. Without a doubt, all this material will be very valuable for the servants of God of the future. With my health beginning to fail as I turn 80, I have nothing left but to be immensely grateful to the Lord for the abundant life He has given me. And I only wait for the day, which will soon come, of my encounter with Jesus to spend eternity with Him. You can see my 15-minute testimony recorded in October 1982 and broadcast on national television in 1983. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Revelation 2:10. The Christian life is not boring, not at all. It is exciting. The abundant life of Jesus.